I'm Chef Ricardo from Wellness in the Schools, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of A Bite of Wellness. For today, we're going to start the first of a series of episodes on kitchen pharmacy. And kitchen pharmacy is our basic catch-all term for using the foods in our kitchen to help nourish our bodies. There are definitely a wide variety of ingredients that are available: fresh fruits, vegetables, whole grains, herbs and spices, and the like, all things that we've talked about in previous episodes. However, the way that we use them can definitely help to nourish our bodies and support our health, particularly when we're starting to feel a little bit off kilter and feeling a little ill. So certainly things like the ingredients we use will definitely matter. For today's episode, I'm going to show you how to make a mushroom crostini in a little bit. Mushrooms are going to be the start of our show for today, and they're certainly a health supportive ingredient. But also too, herbs and spices are definitely a mainstay of our kitchen pharmacy as well. Here I've got some Italian parsley, and I have got some mint as well. Looks like peppermint to me, but both of these ingredients can be very health supportive. They definitely help different body systems. They are things that can help our bodies to stay in tip-top shape, or if we're starting to feel a little bit sick or off, they're definitely things that can help push our body in the right direction towards balancing itself. Also too, when we're looking at that as well, herbs and spices and other medicinal plants can be used to support our body, not necessarily in the form of food, but say in another application such as a tea or a tincture. For today, I'm also going to show you how to prepare a little elderberry tea as well. This is definitely something that's good to utilize when you're starting to feel a little sick. Our herbs and spices are not only going to add a little bit of flavor and maybe just a touch of color to our meals too, but they're also concentrated sources of antioxidants. Our fresh herbs and our fresh spices are definitely a lot flavorful and pungent, but when they're dry, that antioxidant content goes up even higher. Doesn't mean that we're going to use a lot of this, because that's going to be a strong flavor, but every little bit that we use for seasoning also helps our body out in other ways as well too. Last but not least, on the point of kitchen pharmacy, what we use to cook our food definitely matters. Our tools will definitely be important for supporting our kitchen pharmacy, and I've got a little bit of a common set of equipment that I've got here that I use on A Bite of Wellness. Certainly our knives are definitely important. We want to make sure that we're using a stainless steel knife, that we're using a knife that also has a sharp edge as well too. A sharp knife is going to allow us to cut through food a lot easier, and if you're cutting through food easier, you're not damaging the plant on a cellular level, which means that you're getting as much of the nutrients as you possibly could from that plant. Some plants definitely say if you take a stainless steel knife and cut lettuce, you're actually damaging the lettuce. You could actually see that it gives it a little bit of a grayish sort of color, which is why some chefs will use a plastic or lettuce knife. This is a serrated knife. My serrated knife has saw-like teeth. This is going to be really good for gripping, say, bread or say a tomato as well. But also too, let's say that I didn't have the proper tool to get the lemon zest off of this lemon. I could easily get it off in a pinch by just thinly cutting through with the serrated knife. That's going to be a better tool to use as opposed to say a straight edge knife. It's going to grab on a lot more nicely. The proper tool, however, for getting that lemon zest off, because that lemon zest is also a great source of antioxidants and flavor, is going to be our grater or a zester. In this case, this one is a microplane zester, but you can certainly use a box grater if you've got that at home. This has small, tiny teeth. This is going to be excellent for getting off the zest from my citrus fruits, but also too, if I didn't want to say mince my garlic, I could definitely go ahead and zest it down to about the same size with the zester. Also really good for zesting, say, a whole spice as well. So that's something where you'll get a lot more flavor out of a whole spice, like a stick of cinnamon that you're grinding down into powder, as opposed to, say, using a already pre-ground cinnamon. It'll just add a tiny little extra little kick of flavor because it's freshly ground. Certainly when we are cooking, we do deal with high temperatures, and the equipment that we're using definitely matters. In my left hand, I have a rubber spatula. In my right hand, I've got a nylon spoon. Both of these materials are designed to withstand a lot of heat, and it's something that can help us out to just prevent the addition of, say, a physical contaminant into the food. Certainly we don't want to have a metal spoon scratching against metal cookware. That's definitely not good. But we definitely want to be mindful of the tools that we're using, and also just having something that's a little bit lightweight is going to help out. These materials are also just very long lasting. They're very resistant to shattering, so really good to have in our kitchen pharmacy. Similarly, I've got my tongs here, and my tongs have silicone at the end over here that's going to help for grabbing hot things. You'll see me use that later on when we're making that mushroom crostini towards the end. I've also got a peeler here, and that's going to help to just remove the external skin from the food that we may be working with. If I didn't have that serrated knife, or if I did not have that microplane zester, and I wanted to get the zest off of this in a pinch, I can also do that with the peeler too. It's going to help to make the insides of our food a little more accessible. So for today, I'm going to focus on showing an example of our kitchen pharmacy by making a little quick snack, a mushroom crostini. And to go ahead and start that, I've got an oven on off on the side, and I just want to go ahead and toast some bread first to start off with. I've got some bread pre-sliced, and I'm just going to go ahead and give this a couple of minutes in our oven just to get it nice and toasty. I'm not going to toast it all the way, because we're going to add a little more flavor onto that in just a few moments. But let me go ahead and talk about the star of our show, our mushrooms right here. I actually have 3 varieties of mushrooms on my tray to show you here. On the left-hand side, I have some white mushrooms. You may sometimes also see these with the name button mushrooms as well too. The size certainly varies. On the middle here, I've got some sliced shiitake mushrooms. You usually see those, they've got like a very wide cap. You might see them coming with like a thick sort of woody stem, and those will definitely have gills exposed on the bottom side. You can see a little bit of what that gill might look like right here. On my left over here, I've got portobello mushrooms, and I've got portobello mushrooms 2 different ways actually. I've got some portobello caps over here, and these are certainly a very, very nice substitute for meat if you're looking to, say, have a vegetarian preparation of a dish. They'll usually come without the cap. You can see the exposed gills there, but also too, you can eat a more immature version of a portobello. You'll see these marketed in stores as a baby bella mushroom. And all of these are really good options. The flavor of mushrooms in general is going to depend on your variety. So, whoops, my little button mushroom right here might be a little more mild compared to, say, something like a shiitake mushroom or my portobello mushroom. And that's going to have a little more of an umami or a savory flavor, especially depending on how you cook that. That's where you could kind of use that as a bit of a meat substitute. But regardless of your variety of mushroom, it's going to be a pretty healthy addition to your kitchen pharmacy. It's definitely something that can help to support immunity. And it's something that also supports a healthy heart, a healthy gut, and a healthy brain as well too. So to start preparing our mushroom crostini, the first thing that I'm going to do is just chop up a variety of these mushrooms. And I'll start off with a mix of them. You could go with any particular one if you like. We're going to mix them all together to get a nice range of that flavor, the savory, that umami with a little less of a mushroomy forward flavor. So you definitely want to clean your mushrooms. I went ahead and just wiped the caps of all of these mushrooms before I started cutting. If you've got the gills exposed, you don't want to let those get into contact with water. That's definitely important for handling. And you can go ahead and throw out the stems. This is something that could be composted. I know when I was in culinary school, we could actually save the stem, and it was something that could definitely be used to go ahead and create a stock. You definitely want to use all parts of the plant, to say the least. And other than that, it's still got some flavor. It's just something we don't usually use for cooking. So when it comes to making my mushroom crostini, what I basically want to do is create a topping with my mushrooms. So I'm going to slice down my mushrooms to size. Certainly I do like the idea of lining up my mushrooms. It helps when I'm getting my bear claw into place and lining up my knife so I know that I'm getting nice, not too thin, but thin enough slices. I'm going with about a 1/4 inch of a cut right here, and I know that this is going to cook down in time. However, I know that I'm not going too thin, which would make this mushroom really just kind of shrink up into nothing once it actually comes into contact with heat. Our mushrooms have a high water content, so we definitely want to be mindful of the fact that there's going to be a fair bit of shrinkage. The cool thing about that is that you could take that to your advantage and take your mushrooms and actually dry them out in the oven. And that actually, depending on the type of mushroom, if you do that with like a portobello or more preferably a shiitake, you are going to end up with a really, really savory dried mushroom. Nice substitute for bacon, if I do say so myself. But we'll keep this on the side right here. I'll chop up a couple more of each. And we've got our shiitake sliced already, so I'll also throw that onto the pile. But you certainly do want to be mindful that if a vegetable is pre-sliced in the supermarket, no matter if it's a mushroom or, say, any other pre-cut vegetable, you're going to want to use those really quickly, just because that is something that'll go off. It's already been cut into. It's something you don't want to have hanging around for a while. So I'll do a couple more cuts, but what I like about cutting up my mushrooms is it's the kind of thing you can line up nice and easily, and that just helps with the consistency of making sure your cuts are all about the same. Our mushrooms, I treat them as a vegetable, but they're really more akin to an edible fungus. They certainly don't fall into the fruit or vegetable kingdoms. These are actually things that are harvested outside. Nowadays, you'll see a lot of growing systems that are dedicated to the indoor farming and cultivation of mushrooms, but traditionally they were found outdoors. You would have a dog actually trained to sniff out mushrooms and find them out. Nowadays you don't really have that except for truffles, but that is something that I didn't choose to give you for this recipe. So you don't have to go hunting or foraging for those. You could easily go to the supermarket, and I would actually encourage you just to go to the supermarket because there are many, many varieties of mushrooms that are found in nature that we just simply can't consume just because they have a lot of toxic substances. These are things that are very, very hard to identify from the mushrooms that are actually edible, so stick with the supermarket aisle on this one. They're about all the same thickness. We can go ahead and add them in bit by bit. I'll keep them separated for now, but I'm going to go ahead and just grate out some garlic. My garlic, I'm just going to go ahead, flatten this with a knife just to break off that skin, and I can go and cut this down to about a mince or so. However, I'm going to just take a moment to trim that end, and using my tools that are here, I'm going to take a microplane grater and I'm going to zest down my garlic to size to just break it down to about a mince. This is a nice little shortcut. Of course, if you are using a microplane zester, you do definitely want to be mindful of the fact that it's something where once you get to the end of the garlic, you don't want to go so fast. Be mindful of that short end. And if you have loved ones, particularly younger ones, helping you out in the kitchen, wear some gloves too to just protect those fingers. We've got our mushrooms already on the side. We'll keep this over here. I'm going to go ahead and just get my electric stove, my induction cooktop, heated up to about a low-medium flame. And in a moment, I'm going to go ahead and add my extra virgin olive oil. I don't need a lot. I'm just going to add a couple of teaspoons of my olive oil. And I certainly want to be mindful to let that get up to temperature and get nice and hot. Our mushrooms are very, very porous in texture, so if we add mushroom to a cold pan or a pan that's not sufficiently warm enough to start cooking them on contact, you're going to find that the mushroom's just going to soak up the olive oil, it's going to get spongy, and just really not have the opportunity to develop a lot of those flavors that are really, really complex and savory. Definitely those umami sort of flavors. So our pan's getting a little bit warm. It's always quick with an induction cooktop. I'm just going to go ahead and measure out my 2 teaspoons, I should say, of extra virgin olive oil. Certainly too, if you have a canola oil at home, you can definitely use that. We actually don't want our olive oil to have too much high heat contact. So I'm going to give that a moment at first. Once I start to smell that olive oil is becoming nice and fragrant, I'll go ahead, take my garlic, and I'll just start to add that in to start to get a nice saute going. You may have noticed that I went ahead and actually picked up my garlic with my knife. Ooh, that's a nice sizzle. The point to make there is I was using the spine of the knife to pick it up. You never want to pick up an item, say scraping the edge of that blade, not only just for safety reasons, but also too because you don't want to do damage to the blade. We definitely want to take care of our ingredients in our kitchen pharmacy. So our garlic is starting to saute. It's got this really, really lovely sizzle. It's starting to get a nice bit of color. I want to give that just a moment of time, but not much more because that garlic can really burn. And to prevent it from burning, I'm going to start to add in my mushrooms. I know that this is going to take down the temperature of food in my pot, but this is also going to help to start grabbing that delicious, wonderful flavor from the garlic. At the same time that you're adding in your mushrooms, you always want to add a little bit of seasoning to your mushrooms. So I'll start by adding in a little bit of black pepper as I up that heat, and you definitely want to go ahead and use salt. Our mushrooms have a high water content, like I said earlier, so this is going to be the case where you definitely want to get that salt in. The salt's going to help to drive out that water to help make our mushrooms a lot more firm, a lot more crispy as heat gets applied over time. And then the other thing that I'm going to add as we're cooking along here is a little pinch of some other herbs as well. I've got some dried thyme, and you could use a fresh herb or a dry herb in this case. I'm going to use both actually. Because I've got my dried herb here, my dried thyme, I'm taking about a teaspoon's worth and I'm going to sprinkle that on in. Because I'm using a dried herb at this stage of cooking, I want to make sure that it's got enough time and enough contact with my vegetables, with the oil, to be able to release its flavor in order to penetrate and just give that thyme flavor to my mushrooms as they're cooking. Actually, as I'm going on, I'm going to add in the third batch of my mushrooms in a moment. And noticing that things are getting a little dry in the pan, so what I'll do is I'm going to move the mushrooms that are in here to the center. I'm going to come in with another teaspoon of oil because the center of my pan is going to be the hottest part. I'm going to let this get just a little bit of color, texture. I can already see the bottom sizzling there. And I'm going to drop my mushrooms right onto that. Give it a nice little stir to just incorporate the oil onto those new mushrooms. They're still in the center, so I'll give it a little bit more seasoning, a little thyme. I got the thyme for a little thyme, a little black pepper, and for the whole mix, just a pinch of onion powder to just really draw out that savory flavor. Onion powder is something you don't want to use more than, say, a half teaspoon at a time of, just because it can really make a food really bitter. But it's got a sort of savory quality to it, which lends itself well, especially, say, when you are trying to limit the amount of salt that is going into a recipe. I always like to use a little bit of onion powder with the salt if I can, if it makes sense. So we've got that cooking right now, and we'll give that just a couple minutes. In the meanwhile, I'm going to just cut up a couple of herbs to get ready to go in with the next final part of our crostini. I've got my parsley here. I'm using Italian parsley, although if you've got curly, that can work well too. And we're going to pick those on the side and get ready to mince. And certainly, like I was talking about with the mushroom stems, we want to use all parts of the vegetable. These stems are certainly something that we can go ahead and compost, but if I'm being mindful of my kitchen pharmacy, if I'm being mindful of using all the different parts of the veg, this is something I can put in a Ziploc baggie. I can save those in my freezer and add them to a stock that I'm preparing at home. Our parsley is a great source of vitamin K, which is good for healthy bones, but in this case, I just want a little bit as a topping, as a garnish for my mushroom crostini. And I didn't put my bread in all the way, but I'm gonna go ahead and give this a little second toast. We don't want the bread to get too toasted. I've done like a long diagonal slice on the bread here, so we've got a lot of surface area, but I wanna see this get a little brown. Now my mushrooms are starting to look a little more tender. Here, take a look. I'll put these back on heat. They need to cook for a little bit longer, but they're starting to get softer. The flavor is actually really getting amazing, and the awesome thing about mushrooms is they can use a variety of different flavor profiles and also just have a place in different cultural varieties and preparations. I've gone with a little bit more of like a Mediterranean style seasoning. I've got my garlic, I've got my thyme, a little bit of onion. But this is certainly something that we could add, say, a chipotle seasoning to, and give it a little more of a Central American flavor profile. We could definitely add curry and turmeric to this and give it a little more of a South Asian profile too. There are a lot of different directions we can go with mushrooms, and mushrooms are just something that are not specific to any one culture, so really amazing to have in different places. All right, while that's going on, I'm just going to do a quick chop on my parsley. Our mushrooms are a source of a few really, really good nutrients. They're a really good source of selenium, which is going to help to limit cellular damage. And if you aren't getting them from mushrooms, another good food source for that would be, say, a Brazil nut. And also, it's good, it's found a lot in animal sources too, but it's always good to have these vegetable sources. In addition to that, our mushrooms are going to be a great source of B vitamins, which in general are really good for energy production. In particular, our mushrooms are a good source of vitamin B6, which definitely does support healthy nerves. It's going to support healthy blood as well. Last but not least, as I just cut off the heat and just let this just cook off on its own with the remaining heat, mushrooms can potentially be a great source of vitamin D as well too. Now, when it comes to that, you want to make sure that the mushrooms that you're choosing are labeled as being UV treated. Okay, so in terms of our prep for our mushroom crostinis, our bread is lightly toasted, our topping for the mushrooms is mostly cooked, we've got our parsley chopped out for a nice little garnish, but I also want to add a little variety in terms of the texture that I've got here. Our mushrooms are going to be a little on the softer side here. It's definitely going to line for a nice savory quality, but I want a little challenge with the texture. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my mushroom caps and I'm going to do a little bit of a coarser chop. Not necessarily that 1/4 inch that I was looking at before. I'm looking a little more at about a 1/2 inch here. And what I'm looking to do is roast these. I'm going to use a fair bit of olive oil. Olive oil is definitely going to be the friend of our mushrooms here. It's going to help to crisp out our mushrooms. And for that amount, I'm actually going to go with the same amount I used before. So about a tablespoon's worth or 3 teaspoons. And I'm adding a little more here because I know I'm going to need it. My mushrooms off the bat are going to just absorb that colder oil a little bit better. So I'll hit it with that. I'll hit it with my seasoning. And I'll use the same flavors just because it's being used for the same dish. But this is an opportunity, say, to hit with a different seasoning. Say if you're definitely a vegetarian or a vegan who's looking to give these mushroom recipes that we're showing a try as the center of the plate option for your meal, you could definitely add a little more flavor to these. You could hit it with the paprika, which would really, really be nice in terms of just the smokiness and that savory quality. So I'm going to take out our mushrooms, just line them up here on my sheet pan, and these are going to go into my high temperature oven. I'm going to say no more than about 10 to 12 minutes, just going for the size of the cut here, but we'll go ahead, add these in. And so our large portobello caps are currently cooking in the oven right now. What I'm gonna do is just move on to the next part. I'm gonna take my mushroom mixture and I'm gonna chop it down to size. Now, this is something that you could do if you have a food processor, but if you don't have one, like I don't, you could just take the mushrooms after they've cooled down a little bit, take them out, and we'll just run over them with the knife. And what I'm really looking to do is to form a duxelle. Basically, I've taken my mushrooms, I've cooked them down to size, and I'm almost forming, say, like a chopped mushroom, almost like a mince. It's not quite the point of becoming like a soup or a paste, but I just want to chop this down so I can just really play around with the texture. You've got the roasted texture of the mushrooms in the oven right now, and we're going to combine that with the softer, just kind of finer grind texture of these mushrooms. And we're gonna cook them again just to cook out any additional moisture. I am seeing a little bit of moisture. They certainly don't need any more seasoning. They certainly will not need any oil. And I'll just take a little taste. That's a good flavor. So at this point, I'm gonna turn our heat back on and we're just gonna give our mushrooms a couple more minutes under a low to medium heat, and we're just going to continue to cook them down and just improve that texture just a little bit further. All right, we'll give these a couple more minutes of time. We definitely want to see a little bit of a crisp on our duxelle, but we don't want to see it burn. So a couple more minutes. This has been on for about 3 to 4 right now. You may just need 1 more minute at that lower temperature. Of course, if you're using a higher heat, you may not need as much time. But let me go on in. Let's check out our mushrooms. And that looks beautiful. You can definitely see it, that they have dried up a fair bit in the oven. You can see a little bit of a wrinkled texture. To assemble our crostinis, we have our bread lined out. It's been mildly toasted. I've given it an opportunity to cool. I'm gonna go ahead and top my crostini with a couple of pieces of our mushroom. I'll top it off with just a little bit of our duxelle because we've chopped it down to size. It lends itself well to just being scooped right now. So I'll go ahead and perfect. We had just enough for the amount of bread that I've got here. Our duxelle, we don't really want to overload the bread with this. This is just for a little quick bite. So I will certainly go ahead and just take about a teaspoon of our duxelle, chopped up nice, and I'm just going to spread that right on top. And it might not even need as much. Certainly if you've got these bigger pieces of mushroom, you're going to find that maybe you're only going to require about half a teaspoon as much. Or you can just forego the larger pieces of mushroom if you don't like the contrast in the texture. You anticipate that this might not quite be your yum and you don't want to dedicate the resources to it, but you could definitely go with a full tablespoon with a smaller amount of bread. I'm actually scooping a little less as I'm serving it out in front of you. And there's a little extra mushroom on the plate there, but I can always scoop that up right afterwards. Last but not least, I'm gonna just certainly hit this with a little bit of garnish, and my garnish is that chopped parsley. I mean, we're looking at it right now. I see that I've got a little bit of brown right here. You definitely wanna add a little bit of color to that. This is an area too where, say, if you make a sauce that would definitely complement the mushrooms, you can go ahead and put that on the bread first, and then put the mushrooms right on top. That's something you're gonna wanna serve quickly because that sauce is gonna make that bread very, very, very soggy after a while. But certainly at this point, we can go ahead and serve these. They are warm, ready to go, a nice little snack. Certainly if you're having a couple of these at once, they can contribute themselves towards a meal, just a nice serving of veg. So after giving this a little bite, I find that I could definitely go a little bit higher with the garlic. That's just my personal taste. But I'm really getting a nice savory, meaty quality from the meat. Maybe this is something where if I wanted a little more heat, or a little more of that savory flavor, I would put just a little pinch of paprika in as I'm seasoning this. But I personally think that it's really good. So last but not least, now that our mushroom duxelle is done, we've had our little snack there, we want a little something to wash it down that might help support our health. We can look to our kitchen pharmacy and definitely check out a little bit of elderberry. Elderberry is one of my favorite botanicals because it is a plant that will actually help your body fight off viruses. You can have it in many different forms, and for now I'm just going to go ahead, take a little bit of hot water and add that to my packet of elderflower tea right here. Elderberry actually comes from a flower, something that you would see a little more prevalent in a lot of European cooking. It's something that's being used similar to a berry, although it's not quite as sweet as some of the berries we're traditionally familiar with here in the States. our elderflower or elderberry actually has some interesting compounds inside of it, some antioxidants that give the berry its unique color, but also have some interesting effects on our own body. The compounds in our elderberry actually helps our body to fight off viruses. So it's the kind of thing where if you start to feel a little off kilter, this is the kind of thing that can add a little extra boost to your body's capacity to fight off germs. And definitely to help boost that up, I'm going to take a little bit of lemon here and I'm just going to go ahead and juice that. Lemons are one of the healthiest ingredients we could possibly add into our food. The lemon is going to have a great amount of vitamin C inside of that. And that vitamin C is something else that also supercharges our immune system. Vitamin C definitely helps our skin to become healthier. It helps our body to repair wounds. But vitamin C also helps our body to fight off germs. So we'll keep this here. We've got our elderflower tea brewing right now. You'll also see elderberry in just a couple of different forms as well too. It's something that we definitely may see as a lozenge, which makes it easy to take on the go. You want to definitely make sure that you are using a standardized extract. So that's just making sure that the elderberry or the elderflower has been processed properly. So if you are certainly going with tea root, one last thing that you can do, pulling out from the kitchen pharmacy, is to sweeten it with a little bit of honey if you do desire that. Honey is going to be a preferred sweetener because it's a more natural source of sugar compared to, say, something like white sugar. But our honey too also has beneficial compounds inside of it that help, say, if you're having a little bit of a sore throat or a cough going on as well. The amount that you use definitely will determine how healthy it is, so we don't want to add too much honey because it is a source of sugar. But a little bit to sweeten up this immune boosting tea, I'd say that's not a big deal at all. But if you want to go with one last health-supportive ingredient that could also give you a little boost, we can take some mint and add that to our tea as well. Mint in particular is going to help to have a soothing and calming effect. This is something where we could add in, definitely if we're starting to feel a little off kilter. It does have some antioxidant ability. It is something that can help to balance our stomachs if we're feeling a little bit queasy. It's also something too that's just going to have a nice flavor and really play off of that elderflower and the lemon well. Certainly it's something that you can make an agua fresca out of, but if it's a colder time of the year, you could definitely go ahead and put that into tea. The amount that you use is going to make the difference here. For this about 1 cup of tea worth, I have gone in and added 1 packet of my elderflower tea, but also added about a tablespoon of chopped mint. I hope that you've enjoyed this introduction to the kitchen pharmacy as it relates to how we can use the foods around us in our kitchens in order to support our health and heal our bodies. Thanks for tuning into A Bite of Wellness. I look forward to seeing you next time as we have a more in-depth conversation about how to cook our foods to better support our health.